Hi everyone, it's Mr. Rust. This is just a short video introduction to Lesson 3 from Module 3, Struggling Towards Saratoga. The important information on this page that I want you to pay close attention to are on the left-hand side of the page where it says a big idea. The big idea is one that you're going to want to write down in your notes or at least highlight in your digital textbook so that you can save it for later. The big idea is that after a series of setbacks, American forces won at Saratoga. Now, why it matters now is less important because it's just trying to make you feel good about the American character. There's very little connection between the American character and the victory at Saratoga. But why it really matters, I'll tell you, is because this is what ensured the American survival and therefore the creation of the country and its independence from England. Without the victory at Saratoga, the French would not have joined the revolution, and without the French, we would all still be British. Some key terms for you to know and to write down or at least to highlight. But remember too, you can also use the review section in your textbook to learn these terms. I'll write here for you under key terms and people. So here you'll learn about the story of Valley Forge and how the American General George Washington used the power of his leadership and his charisma among the men to keep them from deserting in a very harsh and brutal winter. And there he is, speaking to the men at Valley Forge. This next heading, The War Moves to the Middle States, describes how the British began to defeat the Americans all across the colonies. As the winter set in, the British professionally trained army was better suited to survival. And of course, in New York, George Washington was run out of town in the Battle of New York, and he escaped to New Jersey, where here, at the Battle of Trenton, he scores his first major victory of the Revolution. Washington crosses the Delaware River, which separates New Jersey from Philadelphia, New Jersey from Delaware, and the Delaware he attacks the British on Christmas night in a brilliant military maneuver, and in a sense really proves that he is a battlefield general of excellent quality. This is a really big deal for the Americans, but still no one has come to help us at this point. Even his victory at Trenton doesn't convince the Europeans that they want to tangle with the British and fight for the Americans. So the British take Philadelphia, but then in the spring, after the winter at Valley Forge, there's an important victory that the Americans win. And this is the most important battle of the American Revolution. The victory at Saratoga, where the Americans were able to defeat General Howe, signaled that they were a force to be reckoned with, and that they could be supported as a legitimate fighting force. And the French saw this and decided to support the American Revolution with money and ships and training, sending generals to train our troops. I want you to pay close attention to the military strengths and weaknesses of each side. This is something that could easily be a test question for you. The Americans had untrained soldiers, but they knew the territory, while the British were far from home and had very, very effective soldiers. Ultimately, this inferior force of the Americans was able to outlast the British because they refused to give up. They just refused to surrender. And this is a lesson to us even today. When the United States invades other countries, the United States is destined to fail if the local population refuses to stop fighting. An empire cannot exert control through a gun alone. It takes the willingness of the people to be subdued. So this turning point is very important. The winter at Valley Forge is a close call where the United States almost fails, or the American Revolution rather, almost fails as soldiers suffered from extreme frostbite and winter exposure, and more than 20% of them died from living outside all winter. Now, don't forget here to use the reading checks, right? The reading checks are really important, and you'll want to be able to answer them, and you can do so in your digital textbook. They'll ask you these reading questions, and I strongly recommend that you try to answer them and check your answers to see if you're picking up the right information. You'll need to know about financing the war, and don't skip over the sections about George Washington. These biography sections here are where many test questions are usually found. And that's because the writers of the textbook know that students don't read these extra sections. And so they're really checking to see if you're a careful, thorough reader when you are reading and studying. That's why they put the test questions in there, because they know the best students will read everything. And I know that means you. I want to point out that the financing of the war caused something called inflation. Inflation is when more and more money is printed and the value of each dollar printed is less because there's so many dollars floating around in the economy. Many people were profiteering, where they would charge exceptionally high prices for things like bread or milk, which wasn't worth the value, but because they weren't available, people were taking advantage of the scarcity. There's some interesting stories about civilians at war, especially women, and I want you to pay close attention to that. Here's Molly Pitcher, the heroine of the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. She was among other women who fought alongside. Some women even actually masqueraded as men so that they could serve in the army itself. And of course, the participation of African Americans. Many of them went to join the British, knowing that the British would give them their freedom. There were some who served in the Continental Army, but they weren't given their freedom even after they fought. And of course, don't forget to do the lesson assessments at the end. And online, there's an even more in-depth and interactive way for you to understand this material by looking at videos, doing flashcards, and other review questions. So I certainly hope you'll make the most of your digital textbook. Good luck.